And it's BBOR Black Box Online to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. Yeah, it's going to be starting the live stream just a few minutes early. Still waiting for some people to come in, but I see a couple of you guys are already here. In this episode, I'm going to be talking to you all about the story of Stephen Avery making a murderer and convicting a murderer. Now, firstly, there have been a couple requests to have a direct response to the docu-series Convicting a Murderer. And I also have to give a shout out to Classic Chevy Cat, who responded by saying, have you seen that there's this new series out by Candace Owens in the Daily Wire called Convicting a Murderer? And I honestly did not know that Candace Owens was a part of this because I was caught up with the Zodiac Killer mystery. Every Monday I do a segment about the Zodiac Killer, and I've also been launching a new interview series where I talk about the Zodiac with some other guests on the program. I invite you guys to like and subscribe if you're curious. But I watched the first episode of Convicting a Murderer, and the other parts of it are on the Daily Wire. The first one's on YouTube, and the third episode is behind a paywall. And then I really wanted this episode here to focus on a couple different things. Firstly, to look at the story of Stephen Avery making a murderer from different points of view. I didn't want to only focus in on one specific set of ideas in relation to the story. And the second is the final part of this episode will be an open discussion about serial killers. You can ask any type of serial killer question that you have. So, to begin with some things about making a murderer, I first learned about this because of the docu-series that was made available on Netflix, and we have to go all the way back to 1985. A woman named Penny Bernstein was attacked in Wisconsin, and she was very viciously assaulted, and there was DNA left behind from the perpetrator. However, once the authorities began to investigate, they got the wrong guy. They arrested and convicted somebody named Stephen Avery. He was sentenced to 32 years in prison, and he served 18 years of that sentence before he was exonerated because of DNA evidence. And more or less, the Convicting a Murderer program is little Stephen Avery. Number one, they wanted to highlight that they're portraying him in a sympathetic light, that he is just a gentle, soft spoken, and sometimes even dim witted individual. And at other times, they're trying to act like um, just that he is someone who really shouldn't even have had a criminal record at all. The first episode of Convicting a Murderer really focused on his character references and just talking about his personality, character, moral aptitude completely. But one point that they wanted to be very clear about is it should be a universally accepted fact that almost certainly that Stephen Avery did not commit the attack on Penny Bernstein in 1985, which sent him to jail. Then Stephen Avery is released from prison and he is out for 2 years. This is in 2003. In 2005, there is the murder of Teresa Hallback. She was a photographer and she was working for Auto Trader at the time. Now, I believe she actually was a freelance photographer, but she's went to Avery's property to take some photos of automobiles. Stephen Avery's family owned the Avery salvage yard, and they had between 3,000 and 4,000 automobiles on that lot. So Teresa Hallback is attacked. She is her body is mutilated, let's just say that, and her remains were burned, and her physical remains were scattered. And we have a couple of people in here now. Hey, Batman66, how you doing? Lambda, 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 Tri-Lam, nice to see you. Randall P. Murphy, hey, how's it going? Thank you guys for tuning in. But also, Teresa Hallback disappears and she's murdered. Hello, Libius. And then who was responsible? This becomes the entire focus of everything. And in addition to watching Convicting a Murderer, I was also following the shows called True Crime Central as well as Bad Things True Crime. Bad Things True Crime has a lot of videos out about the Zodiac Killer, but they cover other subjects as well. Hello, Ross. How's it going? And they all were coming at it from the same point of view, that we should think about how Stephen Avery should be the perpetrator in this. Stephen Avery should be found guilty of the murder of Teresa Hallback. And Stephen Avery belongs in jail. He is still incarcerated until this point. And they also have another individual who gets incorporated into this, and it's Stephen Avery's nephew, Brendan Dassey. In the True Crime Central episode, they showed Brendan Dassey's, more or less, a very critical segment of his confession. And he says that he heard noises in Stephen Avery's trailer on the day that Teresa Hallback was murdered. So Stephen Avery was his uncle. He went to the trailer and he walked inside And he's just like, "Hey, what's going on?" And Stephen Avery's like, "Come on in here." Stephen Avery asked him to come in. He saw that Teresa Hallback was handcuffed to the bed. Her legs were spread open with leg irons, and he told her to have sex with him. Have sex with her, excuse me, have sex with Teresa Hallback. And then Stephen Avery shot her 10 times. Her body was then mutilated, set on fire, and the remains were scattered in what is called the burn pit. But some of them were also placed into a barrel, which is more or less like an oil drum. So that's what America has been dealing with since Making a Murderer came out. Brendan Dassey was also convicted, and he is still currently incarcerated. Now, they asked this challenge question in almost all of these films and YouTube videos. They say, why is the media focusing on Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey and not that much on Teresa Hallback, the victim? I think it was on the Bad Things True Crime channel where they even asked the question by saying, do people even remember the name Teresa Hallback? And as someone who has interacted with a lot of people who closely follow the case, I have to say yes. When you are looking at people who closely follow the story of Stephen Avery, number one, his name is more popular. Number two, Brendan Dassey's name is about second, but Teresa Hallback's name is remembered very, very strongly because I mean, I see these hashtags all the time: free Stephen Avery, free Brendan Dassey, justice for Teresa. Teresa Hallback, the victim, is mentioned numerous times. But the ultimate question that I think people have is, did Stephen Avery actually do it? I mean, was Brendan Dassey actually his accomplice? And number one, Convicting a Murderer, the program that's done by Candace Owens, wants to look at how he had previous burglary charges that were misrepresented by Making a Murderer. They misrepresented the details. He was actually a much more serious and intense criminal than he was made out to be. He was actually a much more aggressive criminal than he was made out to be. And even though he was exonerated for the attack on Penny Bernstein, then it's like, does that mean that he wasn't violent before? He was a violent offender. But my own response was, what on earth does that have to do with the murder of Teresa Hallback? If he committed burglaries in the 1980s, that doesn't mean he murdered Teresa Hallback. If he pulled a gun on a woman in the 1980s, that doesn't mean that he murdered Teresa Hallback. So, what are the pieces of evidence that people have in favor of Stephen Avery's guilt? Number one, Teresa Hallback's keys were found in Stephen Avery's bedroom. I believe it's actually behind the nightstand to his bed, and it was kind of lodged in there. You'll see a famous photo of it on the carpet floor, but I think that's after they moved the nightstand and then it fell down. Number two, a bullet was found in Stephen Avery's garage or on his property that had been fired from a gun that was owned by Stephen Avery. And as a felon, he wasn't supposed to own any firearms at all. And that bullet had Teresa's DNA on it. In Brendan Dassey's confession, he stated that Stephen Avery shot Teresa Hallback 10 times. Teresa Hallback's Toyota RAV4, her vehicle, was also found on Stephen Avery's property. Again, this is the Avery salvage yard. They had 4,000 automobiles. Someone didn't even make a very good attempt at hiding it. And then the vehicle is placed there, and it has Teresa Hallback's blood in it, as well as Stephen Avery's blood in it. Now, there's a YouTube channel out there that is run by Lionel. It's called Lionel Nation. And Lionel was talking about a different true crime case. And what he said was that this is about the O.J. Simpson case. O.J. Simpson had Nicole Brown Simpson's blood in his white Bronco. He's making all the hand gestures. That's why I'm doing this. He's like, do you have Nicole Brown Simpson's blood in your car? No. That's because you didn't kill her. Did O.J. have Nicole Brown Simpson's blood in his white Bronco? That's because he killed her. Well, then you could say the same thing about Stephen Avery's blood. His blood is in the RAV4. Teresa's blood is, I mean, it's her vehicle. So let's just focus on Stephen Avery's blood. And that would just be his take on the subject. And Lionel is an attorney. Randall says, thank you for reminding me about Lionel Nation. Very entertaining videos he made on the O.J. Simpson case, particularly addressing the O.J. Truther movement. But he would just be look at it and say, yep, he's guilty. His blood's in the car. Okay, so these are all the pieces of evidence that we put forward as to how Stephen Avery could be found guilty, partnered with Brendan Dassey's confession. What would be the case for him being innocent? After Stephen Avery was let out of prison for 18 years, the wrongful conviction in the Penny Bernstein case, he filed a $36 million lawsuit against the Manitowoc County, I don't even want to misstate anything, but he has a $36 million pending lawsuit. Now, could this have been a particular motivation for somebody to frame him? And at first, you might hear some stuff about how this guy is going to file this lawsuit. Well, the theory that gets put out in the mainstream media is that Teresa Hallback was murdered because because they wanted to frame Stephen Avery, so they murdered her and they put his blood in her car and they burned her body and scattered it on the Avery property. That theory gets discussed. But again, I've interacted with a lot of people who have followed the case over the last 18 months, and most of them don't believe that. Instead, they believe that Teresa Hallback was indeed murdered by somebody, but it wasn't Stephen Avery. It was somebody else, and that person, someone maybe who lived in the vicinity, maybe someone who had access to the property, maybe someone who didn't. That person left all of the bone fragment evidence behind, and then the police thought they knew who it was. They thought it was Stephen Avery. They zoned in on him, and they just wanted to close the case. Ken Maines even talks about the stuff in his book Unsolved No More when he says that cold cases have some leniency. Like there's some waiting time that's available in cold cases. There is some breathing room that people have to explore these. So then, with contemporary ongoing investigations, the authorities are under a much greater sense of pressure and sense of urgency to close the case. And that all of the stuff like Teresa's sweat DNA being found, Teresa's DNA on the bullet, all of that is planted. Not meaning that anybody in law enforcement had her murdered. No, absolutely not. But instead that the evidence was planted. Can I just be real with you guys about some things? I mean, just to openly just get to the heart of the issue on this. There would be so many easier ways for them to deal with Stephen Avery if they didn't want to deal with the lawsuit. Like Randall says right now, to do all that so they won't be sued. Hi, Diego. Yes, I mean, there'd be so many other ways to deal with the lawsuit. If they just wanted to get rid of Stephen Avery, plan a bunch of drugs on him, get him sent back to jail or something like that. I mean, they wouldn't have to go through the trouble of murdering an innocent woman. And I also think that a lot of people, that this mass conspiracy would actually go on to murder an innocent woman. And again, the people who are in these groups demanding for Stephen Avery's innocence don't even endorse that type of theory. They mostly say that, okay, there was a different perpetrator who murdered Teresa, burned her body, scattered the remains, and then the authorities planted evidence to try and vilify Stephen Avery because they thought he was genuinely guilty, so let's just do something to get him sent back to prison. As far as anything to do with his activities in the 1980s, that was in the 1980s. I don't see how that could be immediately connected. But I was watching the Bad Things True Crime video, and they're going through all of these points as to how and why they believe that Stephen Avery was guilty. The first half of it, I'm like, whatever, I'm not impressed. The second half, like right in about the 50% mark, they said that one person who knew Stephen Avery in prison said that when he got out of prison, he wanted to construct some type of torture device or a torture board of sorts to torture women. Now, I'm not bringing that into a court of law or anything. No, but that does give you some cause for concern. That would be something like if you're on the jury and they told you to ignore that, you wouldn't forget it. Yes, this could be an individual that genuinely has sadistic tendencies. Randall has a comment here that says, I don't understand people who are wild on saying Avery is innocent, full stop, no further discussion. My initial response to Making a Murderer was, number one, I wasn't sure if Stephen Avery was guilty or not. I had lots of doubts about his innocence. I could comprehend the narrative on how he was innocent and it was just somebody else who murdered Teresa, but I absolutely thought that Brendan Dassey, the nephew, was innocent, mostly because of Making a Murderer. And to the credit of Candace Owens and Convicting a Murderer, they show that you're only looking at very, very select cherry-picked pieces of information, very, very select pieces of the interviews. And Brendan Dassey did indeed confess, but then he recants the confession, and Making a Murderer put forward the part about how Brendan Dassey had low cognitive functions. He didn't have the strongest sense of awareness, somewhat of a low IQ. He didn't know what he was confessing to. And the piece of evidence that they bring up, which is actually a strong piece of evidence, is he confesses to the crime and then he says, okay, well, can I go back home before WrestleMania? Meaning he thinks that he's going to go to jail, but then he's going to get let out before WrestleMania to watch the wrestling pay-per-view. So I'm all like, okay, I mean, maybe this guy didn't actually know what he was confessing to. And somebody actually wrote out, a full response to Convicting a Murderer in the comments section on YouTube, saying all of this stuff about how Brendan Dassey could have revealed information that only the true killer should have known, that the police hadn't shared with the public yet, are really not paying attention to how they're asking the questions. Okay, who shot her in the head? Anyone could be like, well, Steven or Bobby, may just make up a name off the top of your head, Joey or something like that. I mean, when they're asking like leading questions, who shot her in the head? Well, who handcuffed her? Who spread her legs open? If they're asking those types of leading questions, then it becomes really like a very strong sense of doubt. I mean, maybe there's actually some truth to this, that Brendan Dassey was innocent. At the same time, his confessions are very detailed, and True Crime Central played a very large section of him just confessing, giving the details on how Teresa was sexually assaulted, how she was shot 10 times, how her body was mutilated and burned, and that the bones were scattered on the burn pit. If you ever do watch the True Crime Central episode on Stephen Avery, then you can see that it's like the old America's Most Wanted. They have actors that are playing Stephen Avery and Teresa Hallback and Brendan Dassey, and they look nothing like the actual people. And their actor who's playing Stephen Avery is kind of just like a kind of like sneering all the time. Wicked. And like Stephen Avery is absolutely nothing like that in court. Mostly he's just blank. And the judge is like, you're guilty. And he's just like, oh. But maybe you guys will remember the famous scene in Making a Murderer where Stephen Avery is found guilty and the judge says, you are perhaps the most dangerous person who's ever come through the courtroom. Your behavior is escalating. And that's what a lot of people are thinking. That's what a lot of people are expecting, because I think that there's a lot of content now that is pointing in favor of Stephen Avery's guilt. By content, I mean people are arguing the case that Stephen Avery is guilty, whereas they didn't necessarily do that 2 years ago. And the reasons why they're doing this is because they think that he just put on this facade of being very gentle and not exactly paying attention, not exactly being aware of things. And as I said, Convicting a Murderer is hosted by Candace Owens. And I'm going to share an unpopular opinion right now. I am not a majorly political person. Candace Owens has been a political commentator for a long time. I don't really have anything to do with the political world. But in the past, when I would watch Candace Owens, I think that she's very good at one thing. And I've never heard anybody else say this. She's good at knowing what people expect to hear. This is what you expect me to say? Well, I'm not going to say it, and here's why. Here's why that it would be wrong to say it that way. She's very good at challenging people's expectations. It's about media perceptions and so on. Some people like her, some people hate her. As I said, I'm not political, but I think she is good with that aspect of the presentation. Another person who's actually really good at that is Joe Rogan, and he's good at making people think that he's on his side, and they're just kind of talking and they get into this type of comfort zone, and then he challenges them. He challenges the expectations. And I mean, there are countless interviews that he's done where he has done a lot of that. So I mean, get more focused on the story of Stephen Avery and Making a Murderer. There is evidence of Stephen Avery's guilt. There's evidence of Stephen Avery's innocence. But if you do go back and listen to any of my old episodes about Making a Murderer, the one that I would recommend you listen to the most is the one called The Murder of Teresa Hallback, where not only do I talk about the case, but the final segment in that one is just sharing details about the life of Teresa Hallback, which people posted online, and saying that just some very praiseworthy things about her. No matter what, she didn't deserve to be murdered, and I don't think she would ever have anticipated that her murder would have been the forefront and the central story in Making a Murderer. But those are my thoughts on Convicting a Murderer. I think that there are a lot of cases that they've made for Stephen Avery's guilt, and a lot of things that I wasn't aware of, a lot of things that I hadn't thought about in the past, and they still have not convinced me that Brendan Dassey was guilty and he didn't give a false confession. So you might still see me put up a free Brendan Dassey hashtag. But overall, I mean, I think that they're also very good at pointing out that Making a Murderer was a slanted narrative. Now, another challenge question is why? Why would a show like Making a Murderer put out a slanted narrative? Why would they cherry pick the material like that? Why would they present Stephen Avery in a way of that nature? And the answer is because there are two types of essays. Number one, descriptive. Number two, persuasive. For the persuasive essay, they're trying to argue a point. They're trying to persuade the audience to a particular point. And the descriptive essay is just about stating the facts. And not all presentations are only going to just describe something. Some of them are going to try and persuade the audience. Okay, and somebody said that they had a lag in the comment section, but it sounds like other people are able to hear. Okay, at this time, though, I would like to turn it over to you guys, and I'll ask and answer any questions about serial killers. And firstly, I have to give a big shout out to Jerome, who is running the YouTube channel The French Wrecking Crew. He has talked to me a lot about the story of Stephen Avery Making a Murderer. Jerome has also provided some books for the show, which I have discussed in previous episodes. Firstly, Wrecking Crew by Kathleen Zellner, Illusion of Justice by Jerry Buting, and Convicting Avery by Michael Cicchini. And I have book discussions on all of these that I would like you guys to listen to if you're curious. Wrecking Crew actually turned into a 3-part book discussion, and the other two, Illusion of Justice and Convicting Avery, have an individual standalone episode for each one of them. And Illusion of Justice is written by Jerry Buting, who was one of Stephen Avery's former attorneys. And if you read the book or listen to my episode about Convicting Avery by Michael Cicchini, it's more or less a conversation with an attorney. That's the way it's written. It's almost as if you were just talking to an attorney about the Stephen Avery case. Then that's how it would sound. Whereas Jerry Buting's book is a little bit more formal, but I mean, there are a lot of things we could just get into from time and time again. But again, also credit to Jerome, because he runs a true crime channel where he shares a lot of information, and he's from Belgium, so he includes a lot of French subtitles on documentaries. And one of the documentaries that I was watching today was Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee Cannibal. That's the name of the French title of it, but it was absolutely saddening, sickening, and even though I talk a lot about serial killers on this channel, the case of Jeffrey Dahmer is just horrific. Talking about dissolving bodies in acid, talking about drilling holes in people's heads and pouring the acid into there so he could turn them into zombies, let alone the cannibalism. And then it's all just because I didn't want them to leave me. And then just morphing into this childish, gentle-like persona. And Randall says, yes, some killers can get to you more than others. But as somebody who runs a true crime channel that frequently talks about serial killers, I would think that I would get more desensitized to the details over time. But in reality, it's quite the opposite. I get more and more sensitive to hearing about this stuff. But the case of Jeffrey Dahmer has always particularly bothered me because of those details on what he did to the victims. So somebody asked this challenge question recently, and it was in the documentary Bayou Blue, which talks about Ronald Dominique, the Bayou Strangler. And it says, why do some serial killer cases get a lot of attention and other serial killer cases do not? Because Jeffrey Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy, Ted Bundy, all very famous stories. Jeffrey Dahmer was absolutely more horrific than a lot of these other cases, but for some reason, people still talk about him more than Dean Corll, the Candyman, also a homosexual, torturer, very, very vicious serial killer. He was the torture board killer. And, I mean, it really is quite a mystery about why they zone in on certain ones. But Bayou Blue, the documentary about the Bayou Strangler, did say there could be stories in the media that will sort of take the spotlight because they're a little bit more famous, and that's why stories like Ronald Dominic and Dean Coral won't be so popular. Ross has a question. Does Professor Horn believe the Lake Boreas attack was not the Zodiac? If so, who wrote on the car door? Now, just in case you're tuning in and you're not familiar with this channel, this is the first video that you clicked on, I do a segment every Monday about the Zodiac Killer. And the Zodiac's third crime was the Lake Berryessa stabbing, which took place on September 27th of 1969. After the stabbing, the killer wrote a message on the car door that was owned by the victim, Brian Hartnell. Yes, Professor Horn believes that that was the Zodiac in his theory that he's going with now. And he has said a couple things in the past. Number one, it could have been a copycat, somebody who read the newspaper and saw the Zodiac's handwriting and the symbol. And the Zodiac symbol was published in the Vallejo Times Herald on August 4th of that year. So he had them, somebody could have practiced their handwriting. That was something that he said in the past. And at one point, he said that Hal Snook, his Zodiac suspect for writing the letters, wrote the message on the car door, but that's almost certainly false because Hal Snook didn't arrive at Lake Berryessa until hours after it should have been observed. I repeat, should have been observed. But maybe you're asking the question about his alternative suspect in the Lake Berryessa stabbing, and that is an individual named Leonard Lake. For a while, about a year on his show, the Stones Unturned podcast, Professor Horn said that his suspect for the Lake Berryessa stabbing was an individual named Leonard Lake, who was one of the Boneyard Killers. Leonard Lake and Charles Ng were the Boneyard Killers. Very vicious serial killer duo, a snuff film, set of serial killers, torturers, absolutely sickening. And I'm going to be talking more about them here on Black Box Online Radio. Leonard Lake committed suicide, and then Charles Ng was put on first death row, then life in prison, then death row, and so on. But as of now, I've only heard him say that he thinks it was the Zodiac in his recent media appearances, including his documentary, that he states that it was that it was either the Zodiac or, by the Zodiac, I mean it's his suspect, Dennis Land, for the Lake Berryessa stabbing. Who wrote the message on the car door? That would have been Dennis Land, who practiced his handwriting. Remember, he has a hoax theory, so there are multiple participants, but he has gone back to Dennis Land over Leonard Lake. And Randall says, the Candyman was a crazy case. I was thinking of him today. Well, it really was because with Dean Coral, the Candyman, he's really different than Jeffrey Dahmer because he incorporated accomplices into his arrangement, particularly Elmer Wayne Henley. Whereas most of the things that I've seen about Jeffrey Dahmer indicate that he worked alone, except there's some very striking details about Jeffrey Dahmer that are so similar to the story of Herb Baumeister, the I-70 Strangler, and other people have even theorized that did these two guys know each other? Both homosexuals. Both of them did something where, with Jeffrey Dahmer's first murder, he kept the body under the house for 2 weeks in a crawl space. Then he pulverized the bones and scattered them throughout the yard. Herb Baumeister would go on to do this on his property, Fox Hollow Farm. That's how he destroyed the bodies of the victims. He would meet men in gay bars, take them back to Fox Hollow Farm, strangle them, then pulverize the bones and scatter them in the yard. Very similar details. Both are Midwestern serial killers. Cat Daddy Steve says, good morning. And, Randall says, Leonard, OMG, Leonard Lake and Charles Ng were the limit. Very brutal, vicious torturers. And Randall says, I haven't read the book, The Collector, but I've seen the movie. It's one of my favorite movies. I hate that Leonard Lake got his ideas from the book. Oh, yes. I was thinking of The Collection when I read that out the first time. The Collection is also about a serial killer and a torturer. But you mean The Collector. I've always meant to read that book because Leonard Lake was someone who pulled his ideas from a lot of other things. They think he might have been brainwashed by certain aspects of even his military times or outdoor survival, too much getting to his head. And they said that all this in the documentary Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee Cannibal. And they're talking about how Jeffrey Dahmer did not bond well with other people. So what he would do is retreat, get lost in his imagination, get lost in a set of fantasies, and it would all just turn into a massive snowball effect of not only thinking about committing these crimes, but a very particular word was used, and that was compulsions. Compulsions or urges to commit these types of murders. And he said, even in prison, he still had those types of urges to do so, but he had recognized that after he was caught, he would no longer go through with that. But Jeffrey Dahmer also had an almost lifelong problem with alcoholism. In the same documentary, they talked about how he would sneak scotch into school and say it was his medicine, and he's getting drunk in school. And in the Milwaukee Cannibal, they also stated very clearly that there was a quotation from Jeffrey Dahmer that said he would have gotten away with it. He would have gotten away with the crimes and the destroying of the bodies if he hadn't been distracted because of alcohol, if he hadn't been distracted because of his drinking. And it makes you wonder. But I was reminded of a different story, and it was the story of Ira Einhorn, who was the unicorn killer. And when I did the episode on him, they had a very similar element about how he could have easily gotten away with the crime. Ira Einhorn was not a serial killer. He was a murderer who committed the murder of his ex-girlfriend, Holly Maddox. And he left her body in a trunk in his apartment, in his apartment for, I think it was more than a year. It's been a while since I've done that episode. And then the floor underneath it, like the ceiling of the people below him, started to get this weird color. And then, of course, there's the smell. And Ira Einhorn openly said he didn't do that. Somebody left her body there. He was framed. He knew better. He was an intelligent person. He could have gone to the hardware store and bought some chemicals that would have covered up the smell. But ultimately, he did murder her, and he was convicted for it. And I think he did it. But this whole concept of why wouldn't he have just done that? He provided a very simple explanation as to how he could have gotten away with the crime. Jeffrey Dahmer also talked about how he could have gotten away with it. What's the commonality? With the Einhorn case, what they said was that he probably did it that way just to show that he could. Power tripping, hiding in plain sight. I'm smarter than you. I'm untouchable. No one can stop me, trying to act like he was superior to other people. And with Jeffrey Dahmer, I absolutely had a lot of those similar vibes. But, it could just be a little bit simpler in that he lost control of his drinking. Some people get like that. And in the chat, we have one from David Griffin who says, I can't believe that kid got away from Dahmer and the cops let him take him back. That was featured in the Milwaukee Cannibal as well. This guy gets away from Dahmer, and then Jeffrey Dahmer just says, oh no, he's my gay lover. They're like, here's a photo of us together. I mean, he's of age, trust me. And they fell for that? How stupid are you? What is wrong with people? I mean, seriously, like someone who's just gotten away and like, calm down. I agree with David, it's shocking. And Randall says the movie Compulsions was based on the 1924 case of Leopold and Loeb. Leopold and Loeb is a story that I haven't talked about too much on this channel, but I should get more into that because it's just such a bizarre story about two people wanted to commit the perfect crime again, much like some of the people that I've just mentioned. We got Jeffrey Dahmer and Ira Einhorn who think that they're going to get away with it. Well, Leopold and Loeb thought that they were going to get away with it too. What's the guy's name of that one? Was it Bobby Riggs? Was that the name of the guy, the boy that they murdered? They thought that they had committed the perfect crime just because they're smart and you have manipulations going on and power tripping. But also, they dropped a pair of glasses that had the very peculiar hinge in the middle that you could move. And ultimately, they were captured. Oh, and Randall says something about Ira Einhorn. He wanted to live with the body of Holly Maddox. I could see that because that's just like Jeffrey Dahmer saying that he murdered his victims because he didn't want them to leave him. Yes, ultimate narcissist. Sure, I agree. Randall says the cops have no excuse. The investigator who talked to Dahmer made excuses, and for those cops on Opie and Anthony. It's just like the police make mistakes in these investigations all the time. And it can be done in those ways when they just don't listen to the victims. But it can also be done in other ways when, as Ken Main was talking about in Unsolved No More, when they have this pressure to solve the case. So then you see wrongful convictions like the conviction of Stephen Avery for the 1985 attack on Penny Bernstein. There's all of this desire to solve the case, but did they actually get the right man? No, absolutely not. But it's not unheard of for a serial killer to try and catch a victim, and try to murder someone. That victim escapes. That victim goes to the authorities, and they don't believe them. They don't do anything. A clear example of this is Alexander Pichushkin, the chessboard killer from Russia, who tried to murder a woman. He even threw her body into the sewer, and she crawled out. She went to the police and said, "This man, Alexander Pichushkin, tried to kill me." And he wasn't arrested. And in the first documentary I ever saw on Pichushkin, they said very clearly it was an embarrassment for the police at the time. Okay, well, it's an embarrassment. You let a serial killer get loose. Absolutely, absolutely um, ridiculous. Oh, but here's one from Cat Daddy Steve who says, I just found out about the Boneyard Killer yesterday and watched the documentary. Zodiac could have possibly been a team such as Arthur Lee Allen and Don Chaney. Well, there are lots of serial killer teams out there. And yes, Cat Daddy Steve, I did get your recommendation about that documentary on the Boneyard Killers. It's called The Hunt for the Boneyard Killer. I mean, I put it into the search and it's saved on YouTube. I'm going to look into that one in the near future. But the person you want to talk to about this team of Don Chaney and Arthur Lee Allen working together would be Drew Beeson, author of Sighting It on the Zodiac Killer, as well as the host of the Zodcast. Drew Beeson has really looked into that angle a lot from a couple different perspectives because, as I understand, Drew Beeson does not think that Arthur Lee Allen was the Zodiac, but rather he played a minimal role. He had some limited activity or involvement in the case. Mailing of letters, maybe even sealing certain letters, mailing the Pleasanton letter in March of 1971. Very specific things. Oh, and Randall says, who is this Russian killer? The one I was just talking about, Alexander Pichushkin. Some guy from Russia told me that Pichushkin actually means small parsley. It's like, I don't know how many sizes of parsley they have in Russia. I just kind of always think of parsley as the same size. But of course, Russia has some very vicious serial killers. There was one that I learned about that actually had an extremely high body count, and I forget his name. It wasn't Pichushkin, and it wasn't Andrei Chikatilo, the butcher of Rostov, who was perhaps more or less the Russian equivalent of some people like Jeffrey Dahmer and John Wayne Gacy. Andrei Chikatilo was murdered 52 people, was it? 52, I think, 52, 53 people. He was an impotent serial killer, and he apparently would ejaculate only when he was murdering people. But then he went on to father children, so I think that there's a little bit of an inconsistency in that story. Randall says, wasn't Chiklan? Oh, you mean Chikatilo? No, Chikatilo is the butcher of Rostov. Alexander Pichushkin was the chessboard killer, and he was someone who had a criminal masterpiece in mind, where he wanted to commit 64 murders for the 64 squares on the chessboard. Now, he claimed that he committed 61 murders, and he was trying to become Russia's most notorious, most infamous serial killer, and he wanted to outdo Andrei Chikatilo, the butcher of Rostov, who murdered 52 people. But he was arrested, and before he could murder the 61, and they only charged him for 47 murders, I believe, just going off of memory. I did an episode about that. Oh, it's been about 2 years ago now, so I'm a little hazy on that. And Randall says, someone killed more than that guy? Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Like, just some of the serial killers that I've been talking about recently. Rodney Alcala, how about him? He has been estimated to have murdered 130 people. Rodney Alcala was a serial killer that I talked about most recently on the Tuesday show. And did he actually murder 130 people? We don't know. And I definitely think that he murdered more than whatever's been attributed to him, because he would take photos of women before he murdered them. He would pose as a photographer. And I mean, when you watch the documentaries on Rodney Alcala the way I was before the Tuesday show, even though I know that he's a serial killer, I still don't find him very threatening, and that's shocking, and that's saddening. But I don't find him very threatening. It's the way that the serial killer comes across as a completely benign individual, someone who isn't going to hurt you, but they're very murderous. And some of those details that I shared in the Rodney Alcala episode were just like horrific, like taking the metal bar, pressing it on the woman or the girl's neck. He targeted children too, until they'd start vomiting blood and so on. Now, as far as serial killers with a high body count, as of now, I think that the highest estimations that they have for a single murderer would be Thug Baram from India, who murdered possibly 931 people. But the problem with that one is, number one, I don't think that Thug Baram was a serial killer. He was part of the Thuggee cult in India, so anything that's like cult like, gang related, and also financially related, the Thuggees stole lots of things from people, banditry. I don't think that that meets the definition of being a serial killer. But however, as far as the activities of Thug Baram, it's possible that he didn't actually participate in 931 murders, but he just witnessed them. So, I mean, it's not a competition or anything, but that's the highest number that I've ever seen. Randall says Rodney Alcala won the date, even though it's annoying that they go on about Rodney being on the dating game. Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but he won the date with Cheryl. I forget her last name, but they didn't actually go on the date for some reason. And then they went on to make a movie about it with Anna Kendrick. I meant to look more into that one for the Tuesday show, but I ran out of time. And it was first called Rodney and Cheryl, but then they changed the name of the movie, and I think it is out now, but it has Anna Kendrick playing the woman Cheryl. That's definitely going to be one I'm going to look into more. Cat Daddy Steve says, I watched Rodney Alcala's appearance on the dating game back when it came out in the early 70s. I wasn't impressed with him. Oh, no, I wasn't impressed with anything at all. And he's saying dumb things on the dating game. It's just that he just doesn't look like someone who's going to hurt you. They're like, Bachelor number one, what is your favorite time of day? Nighttime. Bachelor number one, why do you like nighttime? Because that's the only time there is. He's just saying dumb stuff like, if I were anything, I would be a banana. I mean, yes, I'm not impressed at all by his verbiage. And I openly said in the dating game killer episode that I did last Tuesday, it's almost like he was just a less articulate Ted Bundy. He was like a less manipulative Ted Bundy. Oh, and Richard Grinnell is in the chat. He says Harold Shipman had an estimated 250 victims. Yes, Harold Shipman, Dr. Death, a serial killer from Richard's neck of the woods in the UK. Terrible, terrible. And I watched one documentary about him years ago, but I need to revisit that story as well. But Harold Shipman had a body count of over 250 victims, thereabouts. And that is also just someone who reminds me of Jeffrey Dahmer in the sense where it's just like lack of bonding, disassociation from society, lack of emotions. And Randall was also going to mention the banana line from Rodney Alcala on the dating game. But I'm going to have to do a Harold Shipman episode at some point because on Black Box Online Radio, I've covered a lot of the more famous, more well-known serial killer stories, but there are lots of them out there that I haven't covered. And I was talking about this on a recent Zodiac Killer news report about how, does it ever seem shocking to all of you that there are just so many serial killer stories out there, and so many serial killers are in operation, and it's done purely because of some type of lack of bonding with society, and also the desire to have power over people. And not only that, not only the serial killer stories, but we also have the fictional sources to go through. As I said about the Rodney and Cheryl movie with Anna Kendrick, that'd be one to explore. But I was talking to you guys a couple times about the movie Chronicle of a Serial Killer that deals with a fictional serial killer named Henry Brolin. And not to give away too much, but these detectives are trying to catch him, and they corner him at his cabin in the woods. And I'm like, this guy could afford a house and a cabin in the woods, and he still has murderous rage. You could just give me the cabin in the woods. I'm not gonna hurt anyone. I'm gonna be sitting there on the porch, gonna get my rocking chair or something, just maybe sipping decaf coffee in the morning, green tea at night, be like, that's a nice sunset. See, I'm a West Virginian. We're used to just sitting around and looking at the sky and such. I don't even remember where this fictional story was taking place or if they ever said. But who was the richest serial killer? Oh, absolutely, Shel Cavalli, right? No. John Parr Cox, right? No. The richest serial killer, Semyon Mogilevich. No, Mogilevich is a Russian gangster. So again, with serial killers, the definition should really be murder is the primary function, the primary purpose, the primary reason why they're committing murders is just solely for the sake of committing homicides. Whereas like gangsters, cult leaders, or bandits, as previously stated. Those people have a financial motive, or it's done for territory. So the richest serial killer, that would have to be one that I would look into, because interestingly, once someone wrote out a comment on Black Box Online Radio about the Zodiac killer suspect Shulk Vale by stating that there are no instances of high profile individuals going on to become serial killers. Well, there definitely are in the fictional world, and I'm gonna follow up on that. Let's just make a list of like the richest serial killers in the world. That would be something to explore. Randall says it's not about that, like people who have everything but suffer from depression. Oh yes, people who have everything but suffer from depression. And Dr. Jordan Peterson, of all people, talked about this, saying that those are the people that truly need the antidepressants, the people who have their lives in order, yet they're still feeling depressed. That's where the chemical imbalance is. And that's where someone needs to take the antidepressants. And believe it or not, as a clinical psychologist, he wasn't completely gung-ho for them, because he said, you'll know in a month whether it's working or not. Randall says, I bet the richest serial killer is still out there. You know, that could very well be true, because kind of like luring people back to some type of resort, maybe women who get flown out, or maybe they're on a yacht or something like that, and then they just go missing. And as we saw very clearly from the case of Natalie Holloway, just because somebody gets accused of the murder does not mean that they'll be convicted. And yes, Joran van der Sloot, the prime suspect in the murder of Natalie Holloway, recently confessed, and he gave a full confession. But as far as that goes, somebody wrote this out in the comments section on a short episode that I did about the murder of Natalie Holloway, saying, we all know who did it. It was a man named Joran van der Sloot. Natalie Holloway was on holiday in Aruba, and she started talking to Joran van der Sloot, a citizen of the Netherlands, at a bar, and then they went to the beach. And according to his confession, which again I have the excerpt here in the short section on Black Box Online Radio, he said that they started kissing and he wanted to escalate the physical activity, and she did not want to. She kneed him in the crotch, he kicked her in the head, and then beat her with a cinder block, and then threw her body into the water and never saw her again. We all thought that he did, but not 100%. We all know that he did it. Not quite. We thought that he did it. Sure, yes, I thought he was the prime suspect. He should have been looked at. The only theory that I think that could provide any type of meaning, or have any type of real meaning in the Natalie Holloway story, is that maybe, just maybe, they had that rough encounter on the beach and he walked away, and then somebody else came over, an opportunistic abductor, and snatched her. And for a while, they were looking at the possibility of Natalie Holloway being buried at sea, which Joran van der Sloot did say she was put into the water, but they had this ship and this crew that were going out, and they were looking at something that had been detected by either radar or sonar, and it was underwater. And then they went to investigate with divers, and it turned out to be just a cage. But other than something like that, other than some type of opportunistic abductor, everybody thought it was Joran van der Sloot. Richard Grinnell writes, the Zodiac Killer was a narcissist who craved attention from writing about murder. Do you think the narcissistic use of mobile phones have created any impact regarding the crimes people undertake? Oh, yes, absolutely. It's just that they're morphing into different ways. We're going to see an upsurge in cybercrime. We're going to see an upsurge in things like cyber stalking, and just the convenience that people would have for committing things such as that. But if you mean something like murder and such, I think the taunting the victims is going to take all different shapes, and then people are going to find security measures that they can put in place so they can send these electronic communications without getting caught. Oh, absolutely. People will find ways. I mean, I think that it can be done. I don't even want to say some stuff about how you could plan that, because even in the case of Missy Beavers, the woman who was murdered in Midlothian, Texas, back in 2016, some people believe that that murder was planned and conspired by individuals, yet there's no evidence of that. Well, how could that be done? Burner phones, secret meetings, sending electronic communications and destroying them. Now, Ross says, I don't believe anything that Euron character says. Yeah, most likely not. I mean, the problem with his most recent confession is He has confessed other times. At one point, he told Natalie Holloway's mother that he buried her body on land, and then she went to the site, and then it turned out that there's no possible way it could have been there. He said he buried it at the base of a house or something, and the house hadn't even been built at the time of the murder. Don't quote me on that. I mean, but it's something similar. So it's really hard to know what the truth actually is. But the issue with Joran Vandersloot is he was already serving jail time for another murder in Peru. And what was her name? Stephanie Flores, I think her name was. So he's a convicted murderer. I think he did it. And Ross says, "Oh, the Beavers murder. I think it was her father-in-law." Ah, but wait a second. Did her father-in-law have an alibi? Was he the one who was out of town on the fishing trip in California? And he was the one who had he had what they thought was blood on his shirt, but then they actually did some testing, and then it turned out to be dog's blood. Don't quote me on that again. I'm going off of memory. Randall says, "What Beavers?" Yes, we're talking about the story of Missy Beavers. She was murdered in 2016, and it's the video. They have the video of the perpetrator walking around the church where Missy was murdered. The perpetrator is wearing head-to-toe police guard coverings, like SWAT team gear, and even has a headlamp on, a police vest. And Missy Beavers was murdered because of a gunshot wound, even though the media was originally told that she was murdered because of puncture wounds, that she had been beaten with a claw hammer. But that's not even accepted by everyone that she's specifically targeted. Tim Koval of Gumshoe Stories, who has done a very big deep dive into the Missy Beavers case, does not believe she was specifically targeted. He thinks that it was a burglary gone wrong. Aaron Stoner, who also released the video Final Verdict, a user-generated documentary, which came out earlier this year, also believes that it was a burglary gone wrong and that she was not specifically targeted. And Ross says, "Oh, the police released gunshot." Yes, it has been released that Missy Beavers was killed by a gunshot and not by a claw hammer. Just got here. Are you going with robbery? That's from Channel, actually. That's a really hard thing to say because for years, I thought that Missy Beavers was specifically targeted. I thought that the reason why someone would make such a bizarre costume was not to burglarize a church, but rather to wait for Missy Beavers. They showed up 30 minutes before she got there so she could do her gladiator fitness boot camp. She was a personal trainer. So they're just walking around in circles to kill time. Yeah, they're pounding on things like a door just because they're waiting for Missy. And also, in the footage that we saw, in the general public, it didn't appear that anything was being stolen. And people were hypothesizing that maybe this killer is just trying to destroy the security footage. Like when he's like hitting on a door, does he think that the security tapes would be in there, the security system? But, as far as burglarizing a church goes, what could you steal? Money, electronic equipment, maybe going to a church that people think there's not going to be anyone around. Missy Beavers showed up, and that could be. But it really, really is conflicting for me because for years, I just didn't believe that. Oh, what about the killer just wandering around? As I said, to kill time. Richard says, "Was the perpetrator in the Missy Beavers crime a man or a woman, Ned?" It was a man. He was a man. So says me. From the very beginning, I believed that the perpetrator was a male. That was the real reason why I think a lot of people started following the Missy Beavers case was because they couldn't tell who was in the video. Was it a man or a woman in that police outfit? And they thought that the kind of body was moving around like a woman's. They thought that the person had curvy hips. They thought that the perpetrator had a large ass. I was trying to think of a synonym for a large ass, so I'll just say a large ass because that's what it was. That's what they were thinking. But when I first saw that video of the perpetrator walking around in a church, I was like, oh, that's a man. I don't know what people are talking about. Of course, that's a man. And it's not simply that I think that on my gut instinct. The channel True Crime Garage and podcast also pointed out that the reason why some people think that that person had a big ass was because there's actually a belt that is on the police costume that is creating the optical illusion that that person looks a little bit different or that their figure is more curvaceous than it actually is. And it could have been an optical illusion. Ross says, there is a famous author who thinks Jack the Ripper was a woman. Ridiculous theory. Oh, do you mean Sir Arthur Conan Doyle? He has entertained that, and I've done one episode on the Jill the Ripper theory. The Jill the Ripper theory is the idea that Jack the Ripper was a very famous serial killer, and that who could get away with that? Murdering women in the dark of night and then exiting with blood on their clothes and walking away from that? A woman, a midwife. That would be the type of person that could get away with that. Jill the Ripper. Do you guys hear some type of weird tapping noise on your end? I think someone's like hammering against the wall next to me like the neighbors. Oh, Patricia Cornwell is what Ross says. Patricia Cornwell's suspect is Walter Sickert, the famous painter, and he did some paintings like Jack the Ripper's bedroom and also of the Camden Town murder, and she thinks he committed the Camden Town murder in 1908, but... And Randall says Myra Henley. Oh, is she the suspect? You know, interestingly, one of the Jack the Ripper suspects is Mary Kelly, the final victim. That's part of the Jill the Ripper theory that maybe it wasn't a midwife, that Mary Kelly murdered 4 women and then faked her own death, and the body that they found wasn't actually Mary Kelly's body. And I don't believe any of that stuff. I think that Jack the Ripper was a man, if I can be very clear with you. I think that Mississippi Beavers was also murdered by a man, but that's just my take on the subject. Randall says, sorry, just proving women can't be serial killers. Oh, no, Randall says, sorry, just proving women can be serial killers, but usually couple up with men. Oh, there are female serial killers out there, but also, I don't want this to sound like it should be taken in any other weird direction. A lot of the female serial killers are poisoners, or they commit crimes in a similar way. And let's not even get started on murders. I mean, you guys know the famous story of Darlie Routier. I've talked about that on this channel. Darlie Routier was the woman who murdered her 2 children in Texas, Lubbock, Texas, if I recall correctly. I just read a different story about a woman who shot 3 of her children. I don't remember her name. I just read this on Crime Museum. She shot 3 of her children. 2 of them died. 1 of them was paralyzed from the waist down. And she said that it was an attacker. But then police went through her journal and they found out that she was obsessed with a man who didn't want children, and she wanted to be with him, so she murdered 2 of her own children and paralyzed another one for selfishness. I'm going to have to revisit that story because male or female, no, that doesn't give somebody any type of moral power or something, or there's not any greater moral compass for being male or female. People have vicious sides. And Randall says poisoners are the most sadistic. Yes, and they also are afraid of physical contact, or at the very least, they want to avoid it. And Randall says, I thought that story, famous Duping Delight Smile Woman. Duping Delight Smile Woman, I don't know that one, but there was one serial killer case I was hoping to talk to you guys about on Black Box Online Radio. I might only make it a short episode because I'm trying to focus more on the interview series. And I used to do the Anything Goes Friday segment, but a lot of the guests are going to have their interviews released on Friday. By the way, Richard, if you're still in the chat, let's get in touch. I'd love to bring Richard Grinnell on the channel to have another discussion about the Zodiac Killer as well as anything true crime. Richard actually has a lot of good observations about other true crime cases. And Richard Grinnell is the webmaster of ZodiacCiphers.com. And one thing that is so valuable about that website is that Richard has looked at all of these possible Zodiac crimes, the things that are so far beyond just the murder of Ray Davis, the Domingos Edwards murders, the Swindles, and the murder of Sherry Jo Bates, but also like the Melina Rodriguez murders from 1967, the murder of Otto Fawson from 1957. Like there's just so many true crime stories on ZodiacCiphers.com. And I think Richard said in an interview once that he has over 800 articles. I'm over there all the time reading about stuff, ZodiacCiphers.com. But Ross says, the lady from Canada. Let's see, I got to follow back on the chat. And Anthony Mills says, Patricia Cornwell might be an intelligent person, but she is... you guys are very busy in the chat. I got to scroll up for a second. My mouse is drunk. Sorry. I hate it when the computer mouse gets drunk. Maybe it's awake now. Nope, still drunk. That leads her to the convincing herself that all sorts of clues lead to Walter Sickert, despite him being out of England during at least one murder. No, I absolutely don't think that Walter Sickert was Jack the Ripper. And also, Patricia Cornwell, to a certain extent, as Anthony is pointing to, is cherry picking to get a desired result very, very clearly, and also borrowing stuff from other pre-existing theories involved, such as Stephen Knight's The Final Solution, which had Walter Sickert as an active participant, but not the sole Ripper himself. Channel says, "Who is that lady who fake stalked herself for years? Does she get credit for killing herself?" Channel, are you talking about Cindy James? Yes, yes, says down here Cindy James. Oh my gosh, that is one of the most horrifying stories that I've ever heard because fake stalking herself. All right, Channel, wait a second. I'm going to challenge you on that one. Do we truly know that Cindy James was fake stalking herself? Now, if you guys haven't heard this story before, Cindy James was married to a psychiatrist, and then she was a nurse actually, and they were going through a divorce. And then somebody started stalking Cindy James and doing very, very vicious things to her, tying her up. At one point, a nail was even driven through her hand. And then Channel says, leaving a ridiculous voicemail. I always take every opportunity I can to do this voice where it says, Cindy, it's barely audible, but it's just like this absolutely freakish and horrific sound that says Cindy did meet soon. And the whole question is, was she telling the truth or not? Was she doing it to herself? Or was someone doing it to her? And she ultimately passed away from ingesting a bunch of sleeping pills and being tied up. And they had this investigator come in, and Cindy's hands are tied behind her back, but they had like a knot expert try to recreate to see if someone could tie themselves up like that. And he was able to do it, but using different knots. So how does that even mean that he could actually recreate it? And also, as I said, someone had driven a nail through her hand, and she just woke up and her hands like nailed to a countertop. And they were saying whatever she was going through, drugs, mental illness, how on earth do you drive a nail through your own hand? I mean, how do you get to that level of insensitivity? My ultimate response is I had a big reversal on that. For the longest time, I thought that she was genuinely being stalked. Then I began to believe her ex husband a little bit more. Her ex husband, as previously stated, was a psychiatrist. And he thought she had multiple personalities, dissociative identity disorder, and the multiple personalities are taking over. I think he might actually be right. But thanks for bringing that one up, Channel. And Ross says, someone left graffiti at her death site, though. Yeah, I do think I remember something about that. I'm going to have to look up on the case, too, on Cindy James to refresh it a lot. This is your hot take. Cindy James was legit. Ultimately, as I said, I had a reversal, and I think that she was doing it to herself. And I mean, only because there doesn't appear to be a large amount of evidence indicating another perpetrator. But here's something. I used that story as the foundation for a screenplay that I was writing. Very different events, but it was the concept of this woman is experiencing these terrifying sequences, and is she telling the truth or not? And I wanted to have this whole build up, but no, I didn't finish the screenplay, sadly. Cops spent like $5 million stalking out the place and no one ever came. Not only that, but though a person also moved into Cindy's home. One of the detectives who was supposed to be looking out for her moved into her home and was living with her. Oh, and Randall says, right, or comorbidity, BPD, or in multiple personalities. Could be something like that. Now, you guys got to understand, I don't really do drugs. I know very little about drugs, but some people say when people are on PCP or other similar substances, they might be able to drive a nail through their hand. The reason why I'm bringing this one up is there was an episode of 48 Hours that was done several years ago about a man who murdered his wife, about a man who killed his wife. And they were like, was it murder or self-defense? The reason why people thought it was self-defense was she took a harpoon, not like a knife, not a sword, not even anything other than a harpoon. It was a harpoon, and drove it into his leg twice, like going all the way through his thigh twice, a harpoon like for stabbing whales. And he just like grabbed like the nearest knife he could find. I believe it was actually his pocket knife, and then he cut her across the throat and she died. And they were like, should this be self-defense or murder? And I think that it was self-defense. And they openly said, can a person even stab themselves twice with a harpoon? Like to take any type of blade running it through your thigh muscle in and out twice. I mean, not just a few pokes, like going all the way through. You'd have to be a schizophrenic high on PCP, and only a schizophrenic high on PCP could do it one time. That's what they said in that episode of 48 Hours. Anthony says, I don't really do drugs. Well, no, I don't do drugs, but I did try the legalized ecstasy once. There's this thing called Katie, Molly's sister, and I did that on BlackBoxOnlineRadio, and I actually got pretty high off that. And somebody I know who does real ecstasy said, yeah, you sounded like you were on the real thing, but Katie is a combination of like vitamins and such. And the first time was amazing. The second time, pretty good. The third time, almost nothing. The fourth time, I forgot that I had taken the pill at all, and I was just like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be high right now, but I'm not. First time's the charm. And Channel says, you were going to talk about the detective that moved in to sleep with her? Well, all I know is that there was a detective that was supposed to be keeping a lookout in front of Cindy James's house, and that detective ended up moving in the house. And again, that seems like a complete conflict of interest, so to speak. I don't know that much about their relationship. It's been several years since I've looked into that case. I think I did an old black box recording once on that one, but it's one of the ones that was done as like a live stream, so not like this, but like on black box format, so the audio is not that good. And I know that those things are still up there, but I'm not going around encouraging everyone to listening to all that. And also, this is something that might sound a little bit weird to some people, but I'm encouraging people not to buy my book. I wrote Killer on a White Horse and Down the Dark Lane. The only reason those things are still in the description box on this channel is because I haven't bothered to take them out. If you're listening to this, you don't need to buy Killer on a White Horse or Down the Dark Lane. If you're curious about the stories, please feel free to tune in on the weekends for the audiobooks that I am putting out for free. You can just listen to them, because I think the type presentations just have too many errors in them that it's a distraction. I just want to put the audiobook out for free on YouTube. And if you want to follow along with not only the audiobooks, but all of these true crime discussions that we're having, live streams every Thursday starting at 8 a.m. Eastern. I'm actually in the Philippines now, so it's 8 p.m. Philippine time, whatever we call that. Manila time or something. I don't even know. I should. I live here now. But if you want to follow along with these true crime discussions, you can hit the like button and subscribe. Also, feel free to go through some of the links in the description box, including the one for BuyMeACoffee.com. BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNet88 allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout-out on Zodiac Monday. Randall says, the Philippines? Yes. I've been in the Philippines for 3 weeks now. It's not my first time here. It's the third time, but this time I'm going to see how long I can stick it out. Channel says, how about the nurse in the barrel case? Definitely the coworker who left the voicemail. I'm not familiar with the nurse in the barrel. I'm gonna have to look into that, but it sounds like a similar story to one of the seasons of Dexter, season 5 of Dexter, right? Cat Daddy Steve says, I did a lot of drugs decades ago, including smoking PCP, LSD, and meth. What I noticed is that my personality never changed. Some of my buddies would get strange and act bizarre. Okay, Cat Daddy Steve, amazing. Can we just give you the comment of the day award already? Your personality did not change when you were on drugs. Drunk actions or sober thoughts. Yes. People's like true moral compass, I don't think it's altered too much by substances, unless it's something that's a little bit far out, maybe some completely mind-altering incident. But people do the same things when they're drunk that they do when they're sober. They do the same things on drugs that they do when they're sober. And that's just my take on the subject. Ross says, probably no Halloween in the Philippines. This is Halloween right here. This is Christmas. All I'm seeing is Christmas trees. They're like 3 Halloween pumpkins in the whole country. It's weird. Cat Daddy Steve says, if you're deeply disturbed, troubled, and alcohol will release the demon. But that means the demon's already in you, right? Right? Drunk accents or sober thoughts and the traumas, they're just going to be coming out. Randall says, you just missed the Shadow Boxer. He lived there. And where did the Shadow Boxer live? I'm not familiar with that one. Richard says, which Zodiac contributor would you like to interview, Ned, that you haven't already? Well, did you hear the segment earlier, Richard, when I said you should come on the show? And, why not Tom Voigt of ZodiacKiller.com? I think that him and I would have a lot to talk about, a lot of disagreements. Tom Voigt did not do the last interview series. Maybe he would come on this channel. And I'm talking to some people who've already been on the Zodiac Killer channel's interview series if they'd like to come back on Black Box Online Radio. And no, but there was another one that had come to mind that I've already forgotten about. I got to start writing this stuff down. And see, I was thinking about trying to get Michael Butterfield back on the channel, but I've interviewed him on the Zodiac Killer channel, so that doesn't really count to answer Richard's question. Now, there's going to be a surprise interview coming up. I can't even tell you the name of the guest because they asked me not to mention it. Somebody who I'm very looking forward to talking to, and it's probably someone whose name you wouldn't recognize. And he says, have you considered Ray Grant? Absolutely, I've considered Ray Grant. Ray Grant has talked to me a lot about launching the interview series. We've been corresponding back and forth just to arrange a time, and yeah, I would love to talk to Ray Grant. I think Ray Grant makes a lot of good observations about the Zodiac Killer case. And Randall says the Shadow Boxer is insane. I'm not familiar with that one. I'll have to look into that. Oh, yes. Anthony mentions George Hodel, Steve Hodel. I would love to get Steve Hodel on the channel to talk not only about the Zodiac case, but mostly about the Black Dahlia case, because, yes, he believes the Zodiac Black Dahlia connection, which I don't, but I do think that his father, George Hill Hodel, is a reasonable Black Dahlia suspect, Black Dahlia Avenger suspect. I'd love to have him on the channel. Anthony says, though, George Hodel lived in the Philippines, and his son thinks that he was connected to a case there. You might want to look into that one. Yes, I have an episode on that one. That is the 1967 murder of Lucilla LaLue, and it's a very sad story because Lucilla LaLue was dismembered and decapitated, and her head was never recovered. And she is known as the original Chop Chop Lady. That's what they call these cases here in the Philippines. And there are different women who have been dismembered, and they're called Chop Chop Ladies. That case started a very sickening trend. Yes, Black Dahlia, please, says Randall. I'd love to do more on the Black Dahlia. Randall says, I went down a dark rabbit hole trying to find out everything about the Black Dahlia. I'm curious, Randall. By chance, did you watch the miniseries I Am the Night? It's not purely based on the facts, but it really gets into some of the backstories, like global elites and their twisted surrealist art fantasies and how that could have inspired the Black Dahlia. Steve Hodel openly said that he did not watch that, but in the year 2020, the whole year, that was probably the best TV show that I watched, I Am the Night, with India Isley and Chris Pine, and very, very entertaining. Channel says, do any of the My Dad Did It things come to be true? Not in the Zodiac case. No, absolutely not in the Zodiac killer mystery. But Randall says, I haven't seen I Am the Night. It's very entertaining, and like I said, it's good for the background info. It's not really dealing with the exact facts of the case. I thought I Am the Night was terrible. To each his own. Okay, yeah, I mean, it's not going to be for everyone, and there are going to be a lot of different movies that you guys probably will dislike that I'll like, because I'm very, very generous with stuff. I'm very, when I watch a movie, I just try to get into the mindset of I'm trying to follow it. I'm not trying to constantly downplay some things and to try and debunk a bunch of things, or I don't look at it from a film critic. I just want to get absorbed into the world of the movie. And Anthony says, sorry that we disagree about I Am the Night. I was so excited about it. Oh, I was too. I mean, I ended up liking it, but you did not. However, I was excited about it because there's this mini-series that's talking not only about the Black Dahlia case, but also about the book One Day Shall Darken by Fauna Hodel, which I have a 3-part book discussion about here on this channel. More or less, really 2 parts. But back in 2020, Black Box Online Radio was going down different set of pathways, and I found that the channel mostly was focused on California true crime stories coming from the great state of West Virginia, and people wanted to hear about the Zodiac Killer every day. I did the show 7 days a week for about 20 minutes, and those were the old black box recordings. But I didn't want to only talk about the Zodiac because I've never wanted a one note channel. I did end up talking a lot about Charles Manson, Black Dahlia, and some of the other stories like Bohemian Grove. And I even did one episode called like the secrets of the satanic elites in California. And it was all about, these kind of pulling some bits from here and there. And I tried to redo that episode this year in 2023. And what happened was I got interrupted by chickens because the Philippines has so many chickens. Everybody has a chicken in their backyard. I put some soundproof pads on the wall, like the wall that you guys can't see. So that's why you don't hear the chickens that are going nonstop 24/7. But back in 2020, if you go back and listen to those old episodes, because the channel was so focused on not only California, but these sets of true crime cases and how they're connected to the levels of government and to the levels of the elites, there was a sense of clarity with the channel. But what happened was I mostly just began looking at not so much about global elites, Bohemian Grove, and all that, but rather just who was responsible for these crimes, like the Zodiac case. And they used to do the AMAs. Friday, of course, was an Anything Goes. Anthony says, yes, there is literally one rooster in every Filipino home and yard. Yeah. Ross says, do you believe Vincent Bugliosi's helter-skelter theory, or is it nonsense? I think that it is nonsense. I don't even know if Charles Manson believed it, but I think Bugliosi is absolute nonsense with that. I don't think that helter-skelter, the race war and everything, was a real thing. Nope. And I also think that Paul Watkins, one of Vincent Bugliosi's aides and informants, was also providing crappy information, because I don't even think Paul Watkins was that of an extraordinary of an individual in the Manson family. Cat Daddy Steve says, the voices? What do you mean by the voices? And, oh, I'm glad you brought that up, Ross. Oh, Vincent Bugliosi. So, I just think that he was trying to win a case, which he did successfully. But the fact of the matter is, people don't always tell the truth and that such. And I even brought that up. That again is mentioned in Ken Mains's book, Unsolved No More, when he says that like a lawyer just tries to present him as a liar on the stand. Then the lawyer talks to him afterwards saying, sorry, Kenny, I know I presented you as a liar. It's all I had. They make stuff up to win court cases and also to sell books. Oh, Randall says, what about the Tex Watson tapes? Why do you think Tex won't release them? According to Tom O'Neill, the author of Chaos, there's a set of tapes. Is it 20 hours, Randall? 20 hours of interviews with Tex Watson where you might truly hear the motive for the Tate LaBianca murders, but they are sealed in a vault and no one can hear them. I just want to know, like, what's the true motive? And yes, Cat Daddy Steve says, sorry for ranting. No, anytime. You're welcome to rant. And Randall says, MacArthur said he'd return them, and he did. Yes, we can. Can we bully Tex to release them? I don't care what happens to Tex Watson. He's somebody who shouldn't be let out of prison. Because when I used to follow the Tate LaBianca radio program hosted by Brian Davis and Tana Laufenberg, they would talk about how all of the Manson family was thinking that they were going to get out, including Tex Watson. Now, Leslie Van Houten did get out, but you might remember the famous quotation from Tom O'Neill when he said that Leslie Van Houten was someone who wanted those tapes released. Her attorney wanted the tapes released to show that she had been telling the truth the whole time about how perhaps she didn't stab Rosemary LaBianca when she was alive. That's mostly what sent Leslie Van Houten to jail. But I'm really not sure why they didn't release them, because we don't know. We don't know what's on those tapes. Is it going to say something really dumb like, oh yeah, they were killed because of drugs, the Sharon Tate and the four others, and Leno and Rosemary LaBianca? Is it just going to say something like that? Does Tex think that it will affect his parole chances? But he shouldn't be let out. He participated in 7 murders. He destroyed their bodies. Very dangerous individual. And this is the thing that hurt the Manson family the most at their parole hearings. They're like, I take full responsibility for my actions. Oh, yeah, but by the way, it was all Charlie's fault. Oh, yeah, but by the way, it was the drugs. So you're saying that you're easily manipulated, so susceptible to manipulation that you will commit murder? So you're saying that you get influenced on drugs and you commit murderous actions? Destroy them. Yeah, Leslie Van Houten could be released, though. I'm out of all of them, I think she would deserve that. Patricia Krenwinkel, absolutely not. Susan Atkins passed away already. I believe she passed away in 2009. Did not deserve to be released. Bruce Davis, it's kind of 50-50, but it actually sounds like Bruce Davis was a lot more sinister than he comes across in his interviews. And Randall says Leslie was the prom queen, right? I don't know. I always had a soft spot for her. You know what I mean? No details necessary. Oh, Cat Daddy Steve says Tex Watson is an extremely bizarre creep. As I understand, he used to be a good person, but his brain got fried on drugs or something. He had a real bad trip on, what was it? What was it? Acid? Not I forgot the type of drug that belladonna. Belladonna. I know nothing about drugs, as you see. I don't even know what that is, but Abounding Love is the name of Tex Watson's ministry. And yes, you can also go to the Abounding Love website and download his book, Will You Die For Me, for free, as I did. And I did a book discussion on that. It was for an Anything Goes Friday segment. Will You Die For Me, the book discussion here. Richard Grinnell says, do you think Ken Maines is right or wrong for platforming convicted killers on his YouTube channel? Where do you stand on this topic? Do you mean Bill Nagara, the guy from Death Row that he brings on for phone conversations? I think that that's okay. I mean, he's behind bars, and it's a very difficult presentation because every 15 minutes it has to pause and say, call will expire, and they have to call him back. But as far as that goes, it was. I mean, I think it's just a resource and provides some insight. So overall, I mean, people are providing information, and it's not done to glorify the actions of the killer from the episodes that I've seen, unless there's some episode out there that does. But from everything I've seen, I don't think so. Oh, Ross says Patricia Krenwinkel killed Abigail Folger. She also went out on both nights of activity, and she was a very self-serving individual. She belongs to be there. Randall says belladonna is an herb, I think. I'll take your word for it, but that's the drug I think that fried his brain. So Tex Watson got so high on drugs once that he just fell on the ground and started crawling on his hands and knees, and he actually encountered a group of little school children and thought that he was a school bus. So he's crawling through this group of kids and just saying, beep, 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 beep. And he's just talking like that. And that's when they say he had a real personality changed to the, forgive my language, into the juiced up meathead that is represented in the media. And I don't really think we owe him any courtesies. He participated heavily in the murders of 7 people. Randall says belladonna or deadly nightshade is a toxic perennial herbaceous plant in the nightshade family. Some other words I can't read, which also includes tomatoes, potatoes, and eggplant. As I said, I've never done drugs, but I've done tomatoes, I've done potatoes, and I've done eggplant. Someone was also encouraging me to eat sweet potatoes for male vitality and so on. I'm going to do it. And Randall says, crazy, I guess in small doses, people trip on it. Oh, you get high on hash browns. I see what you did there. Hash browns. I got some in my freezer right now. Hash browns are amazing. Hash browns, home fries, any type of breakfast potatoes. I eat cold French fries for breakfast. I love cold French fries. Cold pizza and cold French fries. Those are 2 things that are highly underrated. Even cold Chinese food. I grew up eating cold Chinese food. Randall says sweet potatoes are a superfood. Right on. More power to you. All right, guys, I'm going to cut this live stream a little bit short unless anybody has any final send-off notes. But as far as this goes, anyone can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And I'm going to be using the Black Box Online Radio page on Facebook. Not only the Ned Daha on Facebook, but Black Box Online Radio's page is going to come back. And I do have something to share with you guys. I started a TikTok page. Black Box Online Radio, Black Box Ned 88, of course. Everyone was encouraging me to do that. Like the people that know me offline, it's just like, it's the future. So I started a TikTok page. It's terrible. Them damn kids and their TikTokers. It's just noise. I don't even know if I'm going to keep up with this. I mean, I've posted some of my shorts on TikTok, and there are definitely responses, but just when you watch other people's like little TikTok things, it's so loud. There's no substance, and it's just they got like kind of like silly face going. Who on earth would want to see that? From a behavioral psychological standpoint, why? The future is what the future is. Cat Daddy Steve says TikTok sucks. It's definitely annoying. All right, well, that's all for me now. And feel free to visit some links in the description box once I post them. They're not right there yet, but later on, and also for the next episode. And please look out for some new interviews on this channel that are going to be talking about all types of subjects, but definitely focusing on the Zodiac Killer. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio. Already said that. Please feel free to visit some links in the description box, including one for BuyMeACoffee.com, BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNid88. And Randall says, thank you for taking the time to answer our questions. No problem, guys. Every Thursday, 8 a.m., 5 Pacific. Let's just talk about some true crime. Start your day with some true crime talk radio. And you guys are amazing for following along with Black Box Online Radio and sharing your ideas for the show. And I mean, like, I love that I can incorporate a lot of what you guys think into this program. And we're just going through these very twisted stories together because you guys are not afraid to walk down that side, to walk on the dark side. And some people are. And they just want to, like, put the blinders on and, like, I'm not looking that way. I'm not looking that way. But I appreciate all of you. Bye.